That morning, Jack walked slowly across the pathway. Although he was there, his mind was wandering around. He was completely ignoring the wonderful scenic view of flowers that were planted along the pathway that he was following. There were several colors that made this place look like the most decorated garden, but surprisingly it wasn't. On the sides, apart from the flowers of different colors and species, there were some of the rare trees that were planted there. There were several servants on the side either doing cleaning or maybe going somewhere to carry out the errands that they had been assigned to. After a few more moments, he arrived in front of a majestic mansion that stood tall and proud. This mansion was exuding both beauty and majesty at the same time. It was so huge not only in terms of length and width, but it had 7 floors. The mansion was painted turquoise. There were some areas that were painted white as well, but the turquoise color dominated the mansion. As he got at the door, those servants at the door didn't even bother to open the door for him. Without bothering that much, he pushed the double doors open by himself as he entered the mansion. Humph, that useless boy is here again. He knows that they don't love him, but he keeps on trying his luck. It's not like he can do anything anyway. He has never been given a company to manage. What company can he manage? He's never going to get a chance in this family. Well, you're right, his mother is gone. Now, there's nobody in the family that cares about him because of his behavior. As soon as he entered, he could clearly hear the 2 servants at the entrance of the mansion talking about him with voices filled with contempt. Oh, look at who's back. I thought that you wouldn't dare to come back here. As he was ignoring those that were speaking of him, he heard an arrogant voice coming from his front. He raised his lowered head and directly stared into the eyes of the young man in front of him. The person could be said to be handsome, but not by a great deal. He had short blonde hair that was well kempt. His green eyes filled with both arrogance and contempt as they stared at him. He was currently wearing a green shirt with a black blazer on top of it. As for pants, he was wearing a black trouser. Since they were inside the mansion, he was wearing his sandals. You mean that Jack is back? I also thought that he wouldn't come back at all. Before he could say a single word in reply, a female voice sounded from the living room. Then, followed by the sounds of footsteps, a girl of height of 1.70 m approached them. Just like the blonde before him, she had blonde hair, a beautiful face with a rating of at least 85. Her eyes were green as well. Currently, she was wearing a knee-length beige dress that outlined her features. Unlike his eyes filled with arrogance, her eyes were filled with slyness like that of a fox. Although she looked cute, Jack clearly knew that she was anything but cute. Amongst the 2, she could be said to be the worst. I thought that you said that you were going to look for a way to fend for yourself. Why are you back now? She asked as soon as she arrived before the 2. Jack looked at her before he looked at her brother, whose name was Steve. He simply shook his head without saying a word and went past them via the side. Seeing that he was ignoring them, the 2 of them didn't like it at all. So, Steve immediately blocked Jack's path once again. Jack frowned but still tried getting past him via another side. He had just gotten past Steve only to find that Brenda was blocking his path. Although the corridor that led to the living room was big, with the 2 siblings moving from side to side, Jack couldn't get past them. I think you should take a look at that. He had no choice but to stop and stare at them with frustration. And for the first time, he spoke, "What do you want?" His voice wasn't loud and neither was it low, but it contained a kind of male charm. You know what we want from you. Just tell us, why are you back? Didn't you boldly say that you would go and fend for yourself? Steve asked with a mocking smile on his face. Jack was the 4th son of the Alfonso family. There were 4 sons in the family. The firstborn son was Arnold, followed by Steve, then David followed, and finally there was Jack. As for the daughters of the Alfonso family, there was Cindy, who was the firstborn daughter in the family, then following behind her was Diana, and finally, there was Brenda. Jack's father had 2 wives and a single mistress. The first wife was called Marion. She was the mother to Arnold, Steve, and Brenda. The second wife was called Lucy. She was the mother to Cindy and David and Diana, who were twins. As for Jack, his mother was the mistress. Unluckily, or maybe luckily, he was the only child of the mistress. In terms of age, Arnold took the lead. He was 28 years old. Following closely behind was Cindy, who was 27. After that, was Steve, who was currently 24. David and Diana came next. They were both 23. Following them was Brenda, who was 21. Then, Jack came last. He was 19 this year. Apart from having to show respect to all his siblings who were older than him, he still had to go through a lot in the hands of their scheming mothers. Jack had always been mistreated, especially since his mother's demise 4 years ago. At that time, his life had become increasingly hard as there was nobody that loved him in the family. Although his father would sometimes help him, his help was just superficial as it solved nothing for him. As for his grandfather, he and his grandmother hated him. According to what he heard, they didn't like the fact that his father was keeping a mistress. They said that this was tarnishing the reputation of the family. So, they never loved her offspring as well, as he was a sign of that black spot on the clean family reputation. As for his uncles and aunts, there were some that were like his siblings or his grandparents. Of course, there were those that didn't care about what was happening at all. There were cousins too. But, just like his half-siblings, there were many of them that didn't like him at all. After all, Alfonso family wasn't a small family. Alfonso family was one that had assets that were worth at least $700 million. They were the biggest family that was the overlord of Crystal City. Here in Crystal City, they were monopolizing almost every industry. They had spread their influence to another city called Volant City. But, their influence there wasn't as great as it was in Crystal City. Jack had tried so much to endure all the things that they were putting him through. But the end result was that he couldn't take it anymore after his mother passed away. He had began saving whatever little money he was receiving from the family. He had burned doing so since his mother was alive. At that time, he was still 13. In other words, he had been saving money for at least 6 years now. And since he couldn't take this anymore, he decided that it was time for him to move on and try his luck and see if he could do something with the education level that he had. The previous day, he had left the mansion claiming that he was going to get independent. He had gone around Crystal City to look for an opportunity and see if there was a chance for him to start his life. But, after going around the place, he found that the influence of the Alfonso family was too great. There was nowhere in Crystal City that they didn't have a hand in. Since his half-siblings didn't like him, he was sure that once he started anything here in Crystal City, they would make sure that he failed. So, the only solution that he came up with was to leave Crystal City and go to another city that had no influence of Alfonso family. And so, he had slept in a hotel room the previous night. Today, he was here so that he could take his belongings before leaving. I'm leaving today, so you don't have to worry about me, Jack said to the two who were blocking his path. Oh, I see. So, where are you planning on going to? Steve raised his brows and asked. It's not like you have to know that, Jack replied. At this time, Brenda pulled Steve to the side, opening a path for him. Although Steve didn't like the fact that Jack didn't reply to his inquiry, he decided to go alongside Brenda. He knew that although she was younger than him, she wasn't someone that he could mess with. So, she indeed had to have a plan. She then said, "Oh, no problem at all. We can help you packing." "No need, I can handle it," Jack said as he left and headed to his room that was located on the 3rd floor. Steve looked at Jack's back as it disappeared from the corridor. He then looked at Brenda for answers. Seeing his gaze, Brenda gave him a sly smile as she said, "No need to worry about where he's going to. This is Crystal City, there's nowhere he can hide. As for if he wants to get out of the city, reaching this point, Brenda gave a shallow laugh that gave Steve chills on his back.